know you are getting a lot of information, and I'm going to try to not be, put too much out there at one time, but I agree with you. I think this is a little like speed dating. Excuse me. So with all of us in the room, I think we're going to try to help you along as much as possible. So being a lawyer in this field means that I am an attorney, but you do feel like you're wearing different hats at different times, because being in the field for a long time, you know a lot about the things you just heard about and the teams that you need to have in place. So the first thing you heard about is the professionals in the field. And it is a team, and it should be your team. And you want to make sure you're building that team in a way that you're going to feel comfortable along the way and understand what that means. And part of that is your legal team or your attorney who's going to help you. And yes, even if you're working with a family member or a friend, you need a legal team. The contract phase of this process is critical to ensure your smooth journey along the way. And that's true for many different reasons. One of the reasons is you want to know before you start your journey, before there is a pregnancy, how are you securing your legal rights as the parent or parents of your child or children? And that's critical to ask at the beginning, because many times we do see, and I'm generalizing, so I'm not pointing fingers or anything, but many times we see you've gone through, as you said before, you get excited about a surrogate you're going to work with or an egg donor you're going to work with, and maybe even they've done their medical screening and their psychological screening, but you find out that perhaps there might be an issue with the state that is relevant for the delivery of the child that might impinge your ability to become recognized as the parent or parents of that child. So you want to know going into it at the very beginning, how are we going to be recognized legally as the parent or parents of our child or children? So that's really a critical question, and I can't stress that enough. So you want to make sure you're talking to attorneys in the relevant state or states. It probably isn't, well, especially if you live here in New York, it's not going to be New York. And an attorney should be able to tell you, why is that? In what states are relevant? What states are going to be good for us? And if somebody is talking about legal recognition for a parent in a state where your surrogate may deliver, if you're a couple, is it for both of you or just one of you? And if it is for just one of you, what does that mean? What does that look like? How do I have my legal rights recognized if I'm part of that couple? So those are the kinds of questions you want to ask at the beginning when you're talking to an attorney about what to expect. And probably, to be honest with you, if you're working with an agency that is matching you together and it's not an attorney advising you, you want advice early on about the potential match. So that's even before you get to any contract or contract phase. You probably will not be addressing the actual contract until you've gone through the initial medical and psychological screening and you have that green light to proceed with your surrogate. So you want to keep those issues in mind before you even get to that point. The reason the contract is going to be important for anybody going through this process is it should detail the duties and expectations of everybody from beginning to end. It's going to have in that contract things you've never thought about, probably provisions regarding life insurance. I actually once had a surrogate. There's usually provisions for bed rest and costs and fees associated with that. And a surrogate once said to me, okay, first you have me on bed rest and then you have me dying. So I said, no, really, we just want to make sure everything is going to be covered in the contract. But it really isn't for you to sit there and think about all of those things. You want to be working with somebody who can legally guide you through a contract. So it's well advised, well negotiated, but you should know going into it in advance what to expect. One of the most important pieces that's going to be addressed, issues that's going to be addressed, is medical decision making. You heard somebody talk about already, a couple of the physicians talk about the number of embryos to transfer, 1 or 2. I have actually found recently, I get sort of caught up in this medical conversation because as part of the contract, the conversation comes up about transferring 1 or 2 embryos. And I think a lot of same-sex couples going into this have the idea that they want to have twins, and they would like to try to have one created from the genetics of each dad. And I find myself in the middle of this conversation, and I haven't really discussed this with the doctor, so I'd be curious to hear about this. But my theory is, IVF sort of grew up around how do we help people have a child? And in order to do that, in the dark old ages of like 5 years ago, not really, but not that long ago, we had to transfer multiple embryos to even have a successful single pregnancy. So people have this sense of, we're going to transfer two. It's become commonplace to transfer two, and so we would like to try that. And now we have, because the science and technology is so much better than it has ever been, it really is, the recommendation is the healthiest is a single embryo transfer. So you have, gay dads wanting to try and have twins, while you have physicians saying, no, we really want you to transfer only one. So I'm really curious to hear where the doctors think this conversation is going, and philosophically where people are going to go with this. I'm just a mere lawyer having this conversation with myself, and just curious to see where that's going to go. Because the medical recommendation coming out of the ASRM, which is the Association of Reproductive Medicine, really is the best is a single embryo transfer to produce the healthiest baby. And I'm getting totally sidetracked by the medical. Sorry about that. That happens.
We are going to discuss that at the ethics panel today.
Okay, great. Okay. So anyway, I digress, or go off to the side a little bit. Anyway, one of the most important questions that is going to be in your contract is going to be regarding the issue of termination. Nobody likes to have that conversation, but it's really important that going into any arrangement, philosophically, that you're on the same page as your gestational carrier. By the way, there are two types of surrogacy, traditional and gestational. I don't know, can I just see a show of hands who doesn't know what that means? Okay, you can't, do you want me to say really quickly? It's okay. All right, so traditional surrogacy is where the surrogate is artificially inseminated. So genetically, it is her egg that's going to be utilized. Gestational is where there's no genetic tie to the surrogate. Usually you're using an egg donor, sometimes even a sperm donor or an embryo donor. So there's no genetic tie to the surrogate. And the reason I often talk about gestational carriers is because most of the professionals in the field deal with gestational carrier cases today much more than we deal with traditional. So that's why I mentioned that. Anyway, you want to make sure you're on the same page as your surrogate, no matter what type of surrogacy it is, because you never want to be in a situation where that you're going to have a difference of opinion. So that's really an important part of the conversation. And having conversations around topics such as that gives you the opportunity. I know Vicki was talking about this, and everybody you've heard so far. This is a journey that should be a wonderful journey to have your baby together. So you're building a relationship. Just because you don't know that person going into it, and it's sort of like a blind date and getting to know each other, every relationship will grow over time organically. Some people become very close and stay close, others don't. There's no right or wrong to that. But you should use every opportunity to get to know each other and to build that relationship. Because without that relationship with each other, your journey will not be a wonderful journey. And you are working with a person. She is still a person, and I think sometimes that gets forgotten along the way. The goal is to have a baby, which is amazing, but you're going to do this together with somebody else, together, and you need to have that sense of trust with each other. Because what I tell everybody is you can say whatever you want in that contract, and that contract should be well advised and very clear, but you need to trust each other. Because if you don't, you really should not work together. At the end of the day, you need to trust in each other in that journey. I do want to make one quick point about DOMA. So I could talk about that for many hours, as I think many people can. And we're living in a really exciting time, I think, with seeing what's going on around the country. There were a lot of legal professionals that were shocked that the Supreme Court did not take sort of up the challenge. And with that, we have states going, one at a time, it seems like every day, that is accepting same-sex marriage and granting same-sex marriage. I don't want that to be confused with, we can have our children in that state, we're declared the legal parents because of the marriage, and we're fine. So we still live in a time that the marriage is not necessarily portable state to state, and that your marriage is going to be recognized in every state, but we want to make sure that your legal rights to your child is what I would call portable. And the best way to do that is going to be through a court action, through an adoption, a second parent adoption, or a birth order process. And the attorney you work with should be able to advise you what's the best path, what's the legally required path in the state that you're dealing with, in the states you're dealing with. But you want to know, again, I started with this, that you're asking that question at the beginning, how am I or we going to both be recognized? We all have areas we know really well, but we can't know everything well. I work with an insurance expert who advises, even though I know what I'm looking for, I work with a team of professionals who each have their own input into what's important in this process. And insurance is critical and ever-changing, and I can't stress enough, just because it might be true today with the Affordable Care Act, it may not be true tomorrow. We've already seen some changes between last year and this year. Everybody got really excited about the ACA because it seemed like it was pretty easy to find a plan for a surrogate when she didn't have insurance or her insurance had a surrogacy exclusion. And this year, we're already seeing a change. And I don't want to go into the weeds of what that looks like. What I will say is, under the ACA, it's state by state and insurance plan by insurance plan. So you can't just make a presumption or an assumption that, oh, under the ACA, everybody's going to have maternity coverage and we can easily get a plan that's going to be affordable. So you can't make, there's already, we know there's one state that has excluded surrogacy. It's being challenged right now. We don't know what's going to happen with it. But it's complicated. It's really, really complicated. I know way more about insurance than I ever wanted to know in my entire life. But that's part of, I think, the process is to know. Also, if you ask me a question, and I don't want to speak for everybody, and I don't know the answer, I'm going to make sure that we find the person that has the right answer. And that's part of the professionals in this field working hand in hand with each other. I also want to note one thing about donor agreements. It really is important to make sure that you also have a donor agreement. And I'm making a blanket statement. There's some IVF centers, if you're working with what I call their internal donors, they may or may not advise you to have a donor agreement. Personally, I think, and I think many attorneys agree with me, that a donor agreement is important in every case. But certainly if you're matching with an outside donor agency, you're going to have a donor agreement. Again, this is the opportunity to make sure that your intent and the intent of the parties is clear before you start on your pregnancy journey, so that it can be as smooth as possible. Because when we're building families today, we don't always know what the law is going to be tomorrow, and we want to make sure you're protected in every way that we can in planning for building your family together and going home with your baby.
Hi, good morning. While this gets set up, I'm going to just quickly introduce myself. My name is Greg Payton, and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I have a small practice here in the city. And I also teach up at Columbia University in their graduate school of education. I'm also a gay dad. I have a 20-month-old daughter named Grace with my husband, Robert. Thank you so much. And we're also in the middle of what they call a sibling journey, and so we're in that process too. So this is all very fresh in my mind, as maybe it's kind of sinking into yours. So I'm just going to very quickly speak about the relationships and psychological aspects of the surrogacy process. And again, like others here, I'm really going to be focused on gestational surrogacy, since that's kind of the common practice these days. I'm going to talk about this kind of from the perspective of just what it's like to be a gay intended parent going through this process. I work with a lot of gay intended parents as they approach surrogacy or other ways of becoming parents. And there are a couple themes that just tend to emerge over time when we look at people's experiences. And I'm going to just highlight those themes. The first is that many men report it's kind of like a second coming out process. Then there's this theme of kind of the illusion of control that we have. And then the idea of co-creating the surrogacy relationship. I'm going to talk about each of those really briefly. So essentially, a lot of intended parents kind of think of the surrogacy process is almost like a second coming out process. It's filled with excitement, but also like a lot of uncertainty and a lot of anxiety. And a lot of gay men also say that, this kind of feels like another moment in my life when I'm making this choice, and that choice is up for judgment. I'm coming out, and so people now see my life in a new way, and now I'm choosing to be a gay dad, and they see my life in a new way too. And sometimes they kind of can feel, judged or scrutinized during that process. And I know, for me, even circle of friends that I have, very progressive, well-intended friends, but, I had a lot of people, particularly female friends saying, well, I hope you're doing a lot of reading because, you're a man and you don't really know what that means to be a parent. And so I think just one of the real common experiences for gay men as they approach parenthood is kind of, what is this new identity? And what a lot of men find is that what's really important to them during this process are the same things that were important to them when they were coming out. Kind of finding a community of supportive people, of allies, of people maybe who have been through similar experiences to support them. The second kind of big theme, I think, of this process, and you've heard people refer to it already, is this theme of the illusion of control. I'm one of those people who has spreadsheets for their spreadsheets. And many intended parents kind of find that the surrogacy process is actually great practice for parenthood, and I would certainly agree with that, because if you're here on a Sunday morning and you're taking notes and you're really kind of meticulously researching all these vendors and so forth, you're probably someone who's accustomed to, like, whenever I put my mind to something, I am successful. I can kind of accomplish what I set out to do. And, the surrogacy process just is filled with uncertainties. It's filled with a lot of things that are completely unpredictable and absolutely beyond your control. And so I think it's really important throughout this process to find ways to effectively cope with that, whether that's kind of accepting the limitations of who you are as an intended parent, or sort of tolerating uncertainty in general, communicating both kind of honestly with yourself as well as your partner, and just finding ways to get used to this "it depends" answer, because in many cases it just absolutely depends on geography, on medical issues, on legal issues, on so many different factors. The other big theme I think that is a factor here is just the kind of co-creation of the surrogacy relationship. And I intentionally use that word co-creation because you're really kind of, two people are bringing something to that relationship. The surrogate, who is a person and who has a full life, as well as you as an intended parent. And so while there's a screening process and while there are all these ways that hopefully we're finding a really good fit for you, there are just natural kind of organic elements to any relationship that we can't predict for, we can't control for, and that you may not even be aware of as something that you value until it kind of comes into the relationship. So often a lot of clients that I work with kind of talk about how things get kicked up for them along the way that they never expected. Like, do I want to be in driving distance of my surrogate? That's kind of a big question that a lot of you may be grappling with. Or, what are some of the elements that we're going to have to talk about with our surrogate in terms of how many embryos we're transferring and reduction and other really powerful kind of conversations that you're having with someone maybe you've only known for a couple of weeks. So all of this just is to say that through this process, again, the more kind of honest you are with yourself, the more you're connected to people who have had similar experiences, probably the better you're going to kind of cope through this. The second piece I'm just going to focus on is just kind of the psychological elements of this after the surrogacy process. So what's it like to maintain an ongoing or not maintain an ongoing relationship with the surrogate? What kind of parenting roles do you assume? And then what does your family life look like? For a lot of couples that I work with, this question of, like, do we want to have an ongoing relationship with our surrogate is a really powerful question. Some intended parents may feel a little bit threatened by a mother figure or someone that they may see as a mother figure in their child's life. And so they may feel really averse to having an ongoing relationship. Others might feel like this is someone who we didn't know, but now that we know her, we can't imagine not knowing her, and so we want to have her in our life. And part of that is just about kind of letting the relationship develop as it goes, but also it's about being honest with yourself about what you want for yourself and your family going forward. The other piece of this, of course, is that at some point there's going to be another voice in this conversation of the relationship, and that is your child. And so you may have very strong feelings about what you want this to look like in the future, but again, as a parent, letting go of that sense of control, you may over time defer more to your kids' sense of what is healthy for them or what they want than maybe what you started off thinking. Oh, sorry about that. So another big piece of this is that, the surrogacy process is so kind of exciting and overwhelming, and there are lots of details and moving parts. And I know for me and my husband, when we were going through this and are going through this, sometimes it's just like we're in this process. We're not even thinking about being parents. And then suddenly you're at the hospital and you now have a baby, and suddenly you're now thinking, how do I become a parent? And so, in other words, the conversation about having a baby is maybe less about how are we going to be as fathers and more about, like, how do we just get to that point? So one thing that I just encourage people to do is kind of be thinking about, what are some of the choices you're going to be making beyond those 10 months? What are the choices you're going to make in terms of your career, in terms of your resources, and who you live near, and who's your support network, and childcare, and so forth. And again, here's another place where kind of finding allies and a supportive community, people who have gone through this process, can be very helpful. And then lastly, another piece of this is, again, because the process of surrogacy can be such a kind of all-consuming process, we kind of don't think maybe at times about what our family life is going to look like after surrogacy. And so a lot of clients that I work with talk about kind of this return to the world of heterosexuality. It's sort of like, now that we have kids, we don't really associate much with kind of our gay friends or queer friends. We don't really associate much with the community. We're, going to soccer practice. And for many people, that's exactly what they want. That's exactly how they envision their life. That's exciting to them. For some, they may feel a sense of loss, that, wow, I actually really miss hanging around gay men that I can talk to about gay things, whatever that is, right? For all of us, that's something really different. But there is a different challenge, right, that's out there, because as gay dads, for instance, just as an example, one of the most banned books in America for the past 5+ years has been And Tango Makes Three, right, which is about these two gay penguins who raise a little penguin in a zoo, right? And it's the most banned book in America right now. And so, you're kind of confronting like these strong forces. On the one hand, you want to be a gay dad and a loving gay dad and present in your kid's life. On the other hand, you kind of want to feel some solidarity with queer people, gay people in general. On the other hand, you're kind of getting maybe some not so welcoming attitudes from kind of the heterosexual world that maybe your kid's growing up in. So there are a lot of ways in which this process pulls you in different directions emotionally. And I just want to kind of highlight ways that you, by being here, by being so resourceful, by being connected to others, you already have these strengths to kind of work through this process. It's just a matter of harnessing them and continuing them as you move forward as a parent. So welcome, and thank you all for being here.
That's an amazing amount of information, and thank you. Thank all of you for being here and sharing your expertise with us. I know that we just threw a lot of information at you, but I want to open it up for questions. I would like to first, if you'll bear with me for a minute, I want to ask a question first. I want to ask a question of Victoria. I know a lot of us are thinking now what we're looking for in an agency, what we're looking for in a clinic, but is there anything from an agency's perspective that you're looking for in an intended parent? Are there physical, financial, emotional attributes that you look for someone that you want to work with?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, in particular, I think that it's great that you're here because you're gathering all the information that you need to sort of think through the harder issues. So when we're making a match for you at the agency, we do need to know who you are, and you're going to fill out a lengthy questionnaire to let us know who you are in terms of your work and your hobbies and your extended family and the support you have for going through the process. I mean, we really like to know that people have emotional support, whether it's from families or, wonderful therapists like Greg, but somebody who's helping you through the myriad of issues and details that you have to think about. I mean, as the agency, we will help you, but you need more support, more emotional support than that. The other thing is you need to think through the big issues which have come up in some of the medical conversations, but things like if there's a birth defect during the pregnancy, do you want the pregnancy to be terminated? And then, the surrogates need to know that because we need to make it a very custom match for you. So it's got to be a surrogate who's willing to do that. And the same thing with, we had 2 situations where 2 embryos were implanted and 1 split, so it was a triplet pregnancy. And they both became high-risk pregnancies. But you need to know if you were to conceive triplets, and hopefully you won't because it could create a lot of issues, but you need to know whether you want to reduce the pregnancy. And if you do, we need to have a surrogate who's on board with that philosophically and practically. And if you don't, then you need to have a surrogate who will carry triplets, which is kind of a huge ordeal. So those big questions you need to think about and kind of wrap your head around so that you can talk to us about it, about what you would like, and then we can work with you and help you figure out who your right surrogate's going to be. What kind of a relationship do you want with your surrogate? And it's hard to know at the outset, but ranges from people who really want to stay fairly anonymous to people who want to, not really anonymous. We had one couple from Europe that wanted to be anonymous, but somewhat more removed, to people who want to be really super friendly and have an ongoing relationship. So try to visualize what you're hoping for in a relationship. And again, that's really hard to know before you meet the person because the relationship will take on a life of its own. But just kind of like get your ideas together and be able to talk to us about your ideas of how you visualize things to go for you, and that will be able to help you better that way.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Anybody want to? Yes. If you could stand up, please. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. This may be implicit in what many of you have said about surrogates and pre-screening, and thinking about both medical and psychological issues. I don't know if this is working. In terms of the discussions around whether a surrogate is comfortable working with a gay couple, is that something that's usually explicitly done at the beginning, that an agency or a surrogacy group will talk to the females, about the women about this? Or is this something that comes up later on? And how explicit is that conversation from the beginning?
Absolutely. We need to have the surrogates tell us they're willing to work with a gay couple, a straight couple, a single man, a single woman. We have all forms of families being formed. But it's not a problem. We have numerous surrogates who, will happily work with a gay couple. So that's not an issue.
I just want to add that that's a great question because that's one of the things you want to ask your agency or your lawyer, whoever is on your team starting to build your family. What questions are they asking of the gestational carriers and surrogates? Because I would say the last thing you want to do is be set up with a match with somebody and be looking at each other and each going, why are we here? That would be just awful. So that's really a good question that I wouldn't take for granted, but I would hope that they're asking along with these other initial questions of the surrogate and you to make the best match possible.
And I think the other thing would be to make sure the surrogate understands that, do they want to put 1 or 2 embryos? I've been in awkward situations before where the surrogate comes in, we're talking surrogate, the intended parents, all in the same room. Said so, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, they want to interested in putting 2 embryos, and we, talked. No, I just want to put 1, and so there needs to be a clear understanding of that. I think where things get maybe a little more, you need to be a little more careful. Would be, for example, HIV positive gentlemen, which we work with, and that might take a little more time. I think we find, but there are surrogates that are willing to do that when they understand the risks and benefits. So that needs to be kind of an upfront thing too.
Any other questions? Yes, please stand.
Hi. Are there any special considerations when the intended parents are not U.S. citizens? And if so, are all agencies basically equally equipped to deal with that sort of thing?
I'm going to answer that as a lawyer first. Actually, that's a great question, and it's something that I always ask intended parents, whether there's any other citizenship or nationality involved, because you want to know from the very beginning if there's any other attorneys that need to be consulted in any other countries before you start on your journey, and that's really important because I may be a lawyer here in the United States. It doesn't mean, certainly, I don't even know everything there is about all the laws in the United States, let alone other countries. So we work with teams of lawyers around the country, some of whom we all work together that are in this room today, but also attorneys in other relevant countries. So that's really an important discussion to have from the beginning. what countries are involved, what's the impact, what do I need to know, what do I not need to know, from the perspective of here in the United States, but also if you're going to be going back someplace else. So it can be relevant depending, on your situation.
And is that something that all agencies are basically able
Not,
to do?
I would not take anything for granted. I can't answer that because I don't know every single agency out there. There are so many, but I would not take that for granted. I would ask all those relevant questions from the beginning. Yeah. You need to definitely, you should be, it's great that you're here today educating yourselves, but be your own advocates in terms of, and don't be afraid to ask any questions. I always tell people there are no too many questions and there are no stupid questions, really.
Yes.
Hi. I'm not going to lie, this is extremely overwhelming. But the question that I have is, it seems like there's so many parts and sort of partnerships that are involved here. There's finding the right agency, there's finding the right surrogate, finding the right donor, finding the right lawyer, finding the right endocrinologist. I just feel like there's so many parts to this. Is it to be assumed that whatever agency we decide to move forward with will literally be the sort of liaison to all of that, or are we literally shopping for 6 or 7 different parts of this?
I'll just take a
relationship?
quick stab at that. I'm sure everybody can join in. But from my point of view, I think you should start out looking for your surrogacy agency and your reproductive clinic. I think those are 2 crucial pieces that you need to find and have good relationships with. And from there, everything else will fall into place. If you need an egg donor, if you need an egg donor agency, those 2 big pieces will guide you through the rest of the other things that you need to do.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And most of the clinics that you see here work with most of the agencies and vice versa. So there's a lot of experience, but it's really those 2. The contracts are so important with the surrogate that many of the people helping you are working closely with lawyers or are lawyers themselves. And then obviously, in order to put this all together to make it happen, you need a fertility clinic, which is doctors. So those are the 2 teams helping you, and they help you to walk through every step as you go.
But ask that. Don't take anything for granted. I mean, you can say, I'm overwhelmed, what are you going to help me with? So that you really feel confident. Like Vicki said, you're building a relationship, you want to feel great about that. So you don't want a big surprise to find halfway through that you're sort of out there by yourself and don't know what to do because the team, the agency, and I'm just speaking generally, that you want to make sure that this agency really does help with X, Y, and Z. So ask those questions.
It is overwhelming, and we always kind of hear this. It's like when I bring my car in and there's a bunch of stuff broken. You go, I personally don't want to know the details too much. I don't want to get ripped off. I want to make sure it works, and if it's my wife's car, it's got to work, okay? But, beyond that, you got egg, sperm, and uterus. So if you want to break it down into more of the easiest parts, I would focus on the easy, make it more Apple-like, okay? But you put the trust in your doctor's clinic and the surrogate agency to make sure it all flows, and it really does, especially if you've got an experienced surrogate agency, experienced clinic, it does flow. So I think you want to understand globally, but as far as the fine points, you don't need to be orchestrating. If you're orchestrating that stuff, something ain't right. I mean, I think they need to hold your hand, and as we've been talking about, the clinic and the agency needs to understand what you want. I think that's very important to make it clear what you want. Obviously, you want a baby, but I mean, is it 1, is it 2, who are you working with? But, when it really comes down to it, I don't think it's really necessarily as complicated as we make it sound sometimes.
But I want to add, though, I do have a lot of people that come to me and haven't talked or, decided on a fertility clinic yet or center. And that puts me in a little bit of a funny position because I tell people, it's my intended parents who choose their fertility center. I don't work with just one. And so I think that it is a little, that piece, when they come to me with that, I try to give them some recommendations, but that's something you definitely want to do your homework on as well. And there are great resources out there. Make sure you use the resources. I think you were talking about with ASRM and SART, you can, it's places to start, talk to your friends. You need to feel comfortable about your doctor too. And, I think it puts me somewhat in a, it's a little even almost overwhelming for me, if you can imagine if you're overwhelmed, to say we haven't talked to anybody yet, because it's not really my choice what IVF doctor, you're going to work with. I hope that makes sense, but.
Yes, in the back.
You just should make sure if you are international
sorry, that you have an idea of how the babies will be covered in terms of insurance once they're born. If you are U.S. and you have U.S. citizenship and you have U.S. insurance, the babies will go on your policy immediately. If you are an international couple who doesn't have that, that's a discussion that we need to have. And the second thing is, my personal opinion, I'm with Family Forward Surrogacy. If somebody comes to me, I orchestrate everything, and I also can give recommendations based on what you're looking for on which clinic is good. Do you, for example, want to do, which is right for you, I'm sorry. Do you want to keep the cost down by sharing donors? So, for example, you can go to a clinic that has a shared program. So the costs of having an IVF cycle are very high. But if you split the cost among 3 recipient couples, so 1 egg donor among 3 recipient couples, it brings the cost down quite a bit. So you have to sort of weigh those options, and your agency should be able to help you do that.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Yes.
How is conflict handled? This is a very intimate relationship between the carrier and the IPs and with an agency. So if something comes up, which is bound to, even in the best of relationships, how is it managed? You have 2 very delicate situations going on. So for instance, if the parents think that, oh my gosh, she's not eating what I thought, or is dyeing her hair in the first 3 months of pregnancy, because agencies aren't psychologists, how is that handled when you're in the middle?
Okay, I'll take a
And then
quick
I have
shot.
some- yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so for one thing, everybody has different lawyers. So the intended parents will have their own lawyer, and the surrogate will have her own lawyer. So if it's a legal problem, sometimes the lawyers will communicate. However, a good agency should really be able to help. In any type of situation like that, the last thing you want is a legal problem.
Right.
We have never had a legal dispute in a surrogacy contract. We avoid that by making sure everybody is on the same page from the beginning. And if a wrinkle comes up, like for example those 2 triplet pregnancies, the surrogates in the beginning had said they would be willing to reduce. When it came time to reduce, they said they had both separate situations. They had second thoughts about reducing. So we got in there and talked to everybody and made sure that they went to the high-risk obstetrician, and we just encouraged everyone to follow the advice of the doctor. And that is what happened. In both, they had to have a reduction, and both families went on to have a healthy single baby. But the people on the team, either the medical team or the surrogacy agency team, the one team that's helping, should be able to help to iron out wrinkles that come along.
And I know we're short for time, but the one thing, I didn't really talk earlier about the in the weeds of the contracts and what goes into them, and I'm happy to talk about that later on. You can find me. But when you're going through your contract, everything and anything that you can possibly think about will be in that contract and detailed. And one of the conversations that's going to happen is, you asked about things that come up, like what do they eat and things that you want maybe them not to eat, and hair dyes and exercise and things like that. And that's a perfect opportunity, again, to, as I said, open communication is the key, to have that conversation and facilitate that conversation together to make sure you've expressed how you feel. And some of these items or issues might be in your contract, but your attorney probably will say to you, some of these things are enforceable, some of these things may or may not constitute a breach of contract if they don't do it, but it is a perfect opportunity to really think. You talked about what do you want as an intended parent. It's an opportunity to think about those things, what's really important to me, but also what's important to her, and are we meeting there together? Because you're a team of people, and you're people working together. You know, this surrogate is a person who's going to be helping you, who has her own life and habits, and you should know those. And you're going to share what those are for you too. So going through the contract phase is not just an attorney going through the items, check, 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 we're putting that in there. It's really an opportunity to continue that conversation together and make sure you really are on the same page and have those conversations and talk them out. You know, what if you want to limit her what she's eating in terms of fish. How does she feel about that? Well, maybe she doesn't eat fish anyway, so it doesn't matter. Those kinds of things are going to come up, but they're important to discuss early on to hopefully avoid any conflict along the way. That doesn't mean it can't come up. It can, and you have attorneys who represent both parties, separate attorneys representing the parties, but you also have a team of social workers and psychologists and doctors, and you have that team for a reason. I mean, I've had a few circumstances where I've advised a surrogate, and it's been, nothing major, but dealing with some emotional issues postpartum to seek out that, resource. Provisions are made in the contract for the cost of that that's not covered by insurance. That's going to be detailed in your contract, and you want to make sure that they feel that they have access to any assistance that's needed along the way. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to answer so long.
No, not at all. Can you please join me in thanking our expert panel?